Today's episode shares a powerful story of resilience, faith, and hope in the face of infertility. From navigating uterine fibroids, endometriosis, low AMH, male factor infertility, and IVF, to enduring the emotional highs and lows of the journey to parenthood. This story is a testament to perseverance. Through setbacks, strength was found in God, and support was discovered through community. This journey reflects the courage it takes to keep moving forward, even when the path is uncertain. If you are waiting, grieving, believing, or in need of encouragement, I pray this story reminds you that you are not alone. Even in the seasons of uncertainty, hope can still flourish, and your story is still being written. Welcome to
Faith and Fertility Talks,
the podcast where faith grows, hope rises, and testimonies transform. Hi, ladies. I am your host, Gabby, and I am so elated to welcome you to the fourth episode of Faith and Fertility Talks. This is a space where women courageously share their personal fertility journeys, the highs, the heartbreaks, the waiting seasons, and the victories. Some episodes will feature women telling their stories, and other times I'll have the privilege of sharing their journey on their behalf. My prayer is that every episode encourages you, strengthens your faith, and reminds you that even in the uncertainty, you are deeply loved, your prayers and tears are seen by God, and you are never alone. With that being said, let's dive into today's episode, Sherell's story. Sherell lives in Monroe, North Carolina, with her husband and fur babies. Their family journey began in October 2021 when her and her husband decided to start a family. Like many, they were excited about the thought of becoming parents and eagerly started trying to conceive naturally. Here is Sherell's story.
Hello. So I will start with my fertility journey from the very beginning. So in October of 2021, my husband and I, we were working overseas and we decided to come home to finally start trying to have a baby. So at that point, we were married for 3 years and we're like, okay, now we feel like we're ready, everything aligned. And so we're like, let's go home and let's get this started. So October was like the very first month that we actually actively tried. And then it didn't happen at the end of the month. I'm like, okay, it's cool. It's going to happen. Let's just try again. And then try again turned into a year down the line. I think around month 6 is when I started realizing that something was off and wrong because I started seeing all these things online, like, oh, okay, if it didn't happen in the first year, then something is wrong. You should go see the OBGYN. But in my heart, I knew around month 6 that something was off. And so another job opportunity overseas in the Bahamas came up, and I'm like, okay, well, since we're not pregnant, we can just go ahead and go and work over there. And we can actively keep trying while we were over there. And if we did end up getting pregnant, then we can just come back home. And so whenever we went over to the Bahamas, we were still actively trying. That's when I started getting heavy into the supplements, the fertility teas, anything fertility related I was doing. I was trying. Nothing was happening. And so in, I want to say November of 2022, that officially made a year of us trying, we ended up going on a R&R leave. And then while we were on R&R, we ended up going to my OBGYN. And then that is when I finally had a transvaginal ultrasound. And the OBGYN told me that I was diagnosed with fibroids. I didn't know what fibroids were and never heard of them. I didn't know anyone who had them. So whenever she said that I had fibroids, and then she said it was going to be extremely difficult for us to conceive, and she put it in the analogy of if my womb had to pick between the fibroids and the baby surviving, the fibroids would win. And that completely broke me in that moment. But fast forward to us having to process all of this and making a decision. We made the decision pretty quickly to come back to the United States, back to where we were living in Charlotte, North Carolina. Let's go home. Let's get these fibroids taken care of. We opted to have a myomectomy. Well, basically, because I had so many fibroids, a myomectomy was like the best option. And so we opted to have that. Out of 17 fibroids, I had 14 of them removed in January 27th of 2023. And it was a relief. In 3 months, I believe our OBGYN told us that we could start trying again. We finally had the answer. We finally had the issue that we felt was causing us not being able to get pregnant. And we checked that off. Now we're definitely going to get pregnant. And I think we started trying again in April of 2023. And of course, like, tried again. A couple of months went by, nothing still happened. And so I don't remember who we talked to or what was the reason we decided to speak to someone else. I think it was my OBGYN that prompted us to maybe have a semen analysis for my husband. And so he had a semen analysis in the summertime of 2023. And then that's when we discovered that he had low sperm count, low motility, and things are like abnormal with his sperm, basically. And so we had to correct that issue. And so he started a medication called Clomid to basically correct everything. And we were thinking, okay, well, maybe fibroids weren't the cause. Maybe it was the sperm that just wasn't traveling far enough to even meet my egg. And it was just, dying off in my uterus and not even making it there. And so he was on Clomid for, I believe, 3 to 6 months. I know it went longer than that, but after 3 to 6 months, he had repeated the semen analysis and it did end up approving from his last semen analysis. So we were convinced, like, okay, that definitely was like the issue. It could honestly not be anything else that's like stopping us. And my timelines get a little construed because I feel like so many things happen and I don't have it down to a T. But at some point, we kept trying and it just did not happen. And we ended up speaking to someone that basically said we needed to speak to a fertility specialist. I think it was around summer of 2023 at this point, and the next available appointment to speak to a fertility specialist wasn't until September of that year. We had to wait for an appointment with the fertility specialist. We finally did speak with her. She looked at like our medical history and saw everything that we were facing, along with me having low AMH for my age, basically we're born with all of the egg that we will ever have, and you can't increase it. You can't like make more eggs or anything like that. Basically, when your tank runs out, it just runs out. And so I was born with or maybe I wasn't born with a low reserve, but at some point in my life, my reserve got lower. And so it was lower for my age at the time. I was 31 and my AMH was 0.7. A normal 31-year-old's AMH is over 1. I was borderline, but it was still low. Along with the AMH, the sperm abnormalities, the fibroids, I was also diagnosed with endometriosis during my fibroid surgery. And so just with all of those things, that doctor ended up saying that IVF would be our best route. And so that's how we ended up finalizing and agreeing that we were going to go the IVF route. Fast forward to us not knowing anything about IVF. We didn't know anyone who did IVF. I knew what it was. I just never had personally known anyone to have done it. Um, and so doing what we usually do, we just started doing research. And I ended up discovering this clinic called CNY Fertility. We knew that with IVF, everyone just always mentions how expensive it is. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we're trying to buy a house. We just came off overseas and we had to have the surgery that was $50,000. Luckily, insurance paid the majority of it, but still, we don't want to add on a huge bill to our life. And I'm like, okay, we're gonna have $30,000 just to drop on something that we don't even know that's a guarantee if it's gonna work. I had discovered Facebook groups from being engaged, and I joined a whole bunch of groups for like engaged women, and that's how I got introduced to Facebook groups. So I immediately got onto Facebook and searched for groups that were for CNY fertility because I wanted to just hear personal experiences because all the reviews I was seeing on Google were not the best. So I joined a couple groups on Facebook for CNY fertility, and I'm just sitting around waiting for them to accept me on my phone. And then I got into the groups, and the amount of overstimulation that I felt was crazy because they were using all these terms I never seen. Um, blastocysts, transfer, all these medications. They were using asterisks to like, blur out the name of medications, and I just immediately got so overwhelmed and I remember crying. I made a video. I remember I made a video the night that I got accepted to the groups and I was crying because I was so overwhelmed. I documented that moment because I just didn't know what to do. But not knowing just a couple years down the road we would conquer or become masters of it. And we accepted that we had to do IVF. Of course, there's like a wait when it comes to these medical appointments with specialists. At this point, it was September of 2023. And when I contacted CNY Fertility, their next available appointment to even speak to someone was January of 2024. And so fast forwarded us to January of 2024. I had a consultation with a nurse from CNY. She basically was explaining the process and everything. And I think at that point, we talked to her and then we were just going to talk amongst each other to kind of see whenever we were ready to start because it was just a lot and we had to just mentally, physically prepare financially in everything. So January 2024, we spoke to a representative from CNY and then we ended up doing our first round of IVF in July of 2024. We ended up doing our second round in November of 2024. And during that whole process, it was discovered that my tubes were inflamed and damaged, basically from the endometriosis. My tubes were damaged. And so, right after my egg retrieval in November, we ended up having the surgery to remove both of the tubes. So, for my first cycle, we ended up making one embryo that we froze at day 3. Our second cycle, we ended up making one embryo that we froze at day 6. And so in June of 2025, we did our first transfer and we ended up transferring the first day 3 embryo that we made from our first round because the day 6 embryo, which is a blastocyst, tested as genetically abnormal. So we were like, let's transfer our day 3 embryo that we named Snowflake. We did our first transfer in June 2025. The baby implanted into my womb, but it ended up being a chemical pregnancy, which basically means that the embryo implanted, but it stopped developing. And so because it was so early, the loss, it was like deemed as a chemical, but it is still deemed a miscarriage. So that was our first like ever transfer that we attempted. And at the same time we were doing our transfer, we also were in the process of buying a house. And that entire time period with buying the house, having a chemical pregnancy, and like a lot of things going on in our family, it was just like extremely stressful. So we took a long, 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 long break from everything and restarted back in April of 2026 this year. So we took a break from June to April. I think that was almost like 9 months, basically. We took to just kind of decompress, get settled in our house, get our minds right, get back right financially to be able to pay for the cycle because this time we paid out of pocket. And so we started back up. We did our third round. And this round, it was our most difficult round because it was the longest period of me using medication, things with our families made it a lot stress on us. We were thrown a monkey wrench because my provider has set up a specific protocol for me to try. But whenever I went to go do my blood work, one of my tests was extremely elevated, which is called FSH. It's basically whenever your brain tells your ovaries to grow follicles. And a normal range is anywhere from like 2 to 10. And mine was 35. But because I have diminished ovarian reserve, it's normal for that to happen. But mine goes up and down, and we never know what determines it. I honestly feel like that was divinely orchestrated by God because this cycle, although it was the most difficult one, it ended up being our most successful one. And we ended up creating 3 embryos. So basically, we had 4 eggs retrieved. Out of those 4 eggs, 3 of them were mature and 3 of them fertilized, which means that we created 3 embryos. And we opted to freeze all 3 at day 3, which is cleavage stage, 2 days before they make it to the blastocyst stage of embryos. And so that was our third round. We named our trio the Breakfast Club, and they are pancake waffle and French toast. That's our our Breakfast Club trio of our embryos that are frozen right now. And right now, currently, because I have endometriosis, I have to do an extra step in IVF, which is basically it's called suppression, where we have to suppress and quiet the endometriosis, basically tell it to shut up, stop doing everything. It sends me into a medicated menopause, and that shuts down the estrogen production in my body. And I had to do that for 60 days. I took the first shot about a week ago, and my 60 days will be complete at the end of July. And whenever my menstrual cycle returns after the suppression is when we get the go to transfer, which timeline wise should put me around September of 2026 of this year. Some challenges that I faced during the fertility journey is definitely being one of the only people that I've known to have done IVF. But even before IVF, just being diagnosed with so many different things, I felt like my body was like working against me. And I didn't understand or know why I was being diagnosed with everything. So to have fibroids, endometriosis, low AMH, and I was at the time a 31-year-old woman. I'm like, well, what I started thinking back on my life choices, all the things that I've done, and I started like blaming myself, obviously, because I'm thinking what I should have done differently to have possibly prevented it. So I'm thinking about being on birth control younger. Maybe I should have never been on birth control. And then I'm thinking about being in the military. Maybe I shouldn't have joined the military because we received so much medication, all these shots, being in different places, eating different foods, being exposed to different chemicals and stuff. I'm like, well, maybe those exposures and all those shots that I took over the years definitely caused a lot of things that just happened in my body, especially with fibroids, just thriving off of estrogen and things that kind of that you basically give your body. And I know birth control is nothing but estrogen. And I was on birth control from the age of 17 to 23. So I'm like, wow, maybe I shouldn't have been on birth control that long, or just all the what ifs and all the different things that I could have done differently. It just fell through my mind. So I started thinking of just like basically a bunch of guilt on why my body was working against me. And of course, I feel like it was my fault. So that was just one of the challenges I faced with dealing with all my diagnoses. When it came to IVF, it was just me not personally knowing anyone that had went through it. I did have a battle buddy, basically a girl that I served with in the military, and I discovered that her and her husband were going through IVF as well. She definitely came in at a time where I was going through my first round. She gave me a lot of information and advice and encouragement and things. So that definitely helped. But in our community, being Black, It's definitely something that's not talked about a lot. Infertility, when you're Black, sometimes they deem you as something being wrong with you, especially if you haven't been like majority of your periods and had children earlier, going into your early to mid 30s. They're like, something's wrong, you're broken, and it becomes a judgmental thing, then a supportive thing. So then it starts feeling extremely isolating, not with just doing IVF, but infertility, period, because a lot of people were actually weaponize religion against you and say that if you haven't conceived, IVF is of the devil, maybe you're not meant to be a parent. So the journey becomes isolating. It's been me and my husband heavily depending on each other. When we first started going through everything, we definitely didn't really share with people. But the second time around, we started sharing more and more with our family members and our friends because we definitely started realizing how important it was to have that support. But then that also came with tone deaf comments, people that tried to support you, but they still ended up saying the wrong thing. And so that makes you immediately want to like withdraw and stay to yourself. You're like, dang, I don't even know why I told you in the first place because here you are, you're making me feel like you're hurting my feelings and stuff. So the journey has been isolating. It gets really lonely. And in the periods of being in a dark space, you go outside and you see families every corner you turn. You get on social media, every video is of a baby or a happy family with their children. And you're like, why haven't I been in a position to get that or deserve that? And you start thinking all these negative things and you start getting in your head. But to summarize, the mental aspect of it all has been the most difficult part. But physically, IVF is very, very demanding when it comes to physicality. So it comes with, of course, all the shots. I think when people think of IVF, all they think is, oh, you're taking shots in your belly. But that's not all. It comes with injecting yourself. Well, my husband did my injections, but it comes with you taking these injections and you're watching your body change, your mood swings, you're giving yourself estrogen every single day, and you're getting 3 to 4 shots in your belly. IVF came with a lot of physical demands with getting poked every other day, having to travel on short notice, having to wake up super early in the morning to get poked, and then having a full day of work all within a 2 week time span. It was just like a lot and physically draining. So those were some of the challenges I faced throughout the process. This journey is what brought me closer to God because when everything started happening, it took a lot on my mental health and I was in a really bad space. And then I went to it's a funny story about church. I went to Elevation Church here in Charlotte one day because I always wanted to go to Elevation Church. And I had not had a church that I ever went to in Charlotte, but that's been something I wanted to do. So this was in 2023 after the surgeries, the diagnoses, and everything. And I really want to get back to church. Elevation was the one everyone talked about it in Charlotte, so that's why I chose Elevation. Went to Elevation and didn't have the best experience. But I ended up posting it on my Facebook or Instagram story one day that I went to Elevation and my friend saw it and she was like, well, how did it go? And I was like, it wasn't the best experience. And she was like, well, next time just come to my church. And I'm like, okay. And so I think it was actually the very next Sunday, she invited me to church with her. The church was Union Church, Charlotte. And so I ended up going with her and I had a really great time. I'm like, oh my gosh, I really like this church. And so I came home, told my husband about it, told my husband of such a great time I had. And I think it was the very next Sunday that him and I ended up going to Union together and he ended up liking it. And it was so funny because my husband wasn't in church in a while. He had his beliefs in God, of course, but he hadn't been to church in such a long time. We both had a really great time. We resonated with the pastor. Everyone was so friendly. The environment was just like, oh my gosh, we belong here. And so we definitely just kept going back to back. The first time going together was in November or December of 2023. We just kept going. We did Grove Track and then we ended up getting baptized in April 2025. After going to Union for a year plus, we finally made a decision and became members and we still go to church at Union. But I will say that this journey is what led me to want to get back in church. And with getting back in church, I was led to Union Church, and Union Church is what helped me strengthen my journey with getting closer to God, and is what helped me and gave me the strength to get through this journey. So I rely heavily on faith. I still rely heavily on faith. We're just seeing how many other couples in church are going through the same thing, including our pastor. Him and his wife went through the same thing. Pastors from other campuses of Union Church that are going through the same thing. There's so many couples that we got to hear their stories and see how God blessed them. And we know that if they worked a miracle with them, then He's going to work a miracle with us. And our faith has taught us so much about our journey.
Thank you for listening till the end. I truly hope this testimony blessed you, uplifted your spirit, and renewed your hope. If it did, I invite you to share it with a friend or family member who may need encouragement. Post it to your socials or leave a review. Your support helps these stories reach the hearts of those that need it as well. This is more than a podcast. It's a safe space to be seen, heard, and uplifted. Until next episode, keep holding on to hope. Thank you for tuning into
Faith and Fertility Talks.